Hello, everyone. Welcome to Understanding the Stories of the Bible, where we are endeavoring to unpack these ancient stories from Scripture to find contemporary truth, things that help us in our daily journey. And so today we're going to look at Numbers chapter 13 and 14. And this is the story of Israel in their wilderness journey when they came to the threshold, the brink of the promised land. It was in a wilderness called Paran at a place called KADESH BARNEA. And from there, they made a critical choice that affected them for the rest of their lives. So we'll get into this story in just a moment, but first, let's pray. God, we thank you for these stories that come from your treasured Scripture. We thank you, Lord, for the miracle of the Bible that was compiled and preserved, protected, and handed down through centuries, that we might have this Scripture before us to study your truth. And in these stories specifically, help us to find truth, things that will help us understand the world, understand ourselves, and the challenges that we all face. Bless everyone that watches this video or hears the podcast, that you may speak into our hearts today the things that you want to say from heaven. And help me, Lord, in my mind to be able to articulate these things that you would show me from Scripture. Help me to be accurate and to just move through this process, being led by the Holy Spirit. Lead us into all truth. Teach us, Lord, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen. So the nature of these stories in Scripture is such that they are actually morality plays. And they are these narratives that within the scope of these stories, it shows us right from wrong. It shows us moral from immoral. And so the purpose of the stories of the Bible is to give us a backdrop so that we can rightfully interpret contemporary situations in light of what we understand from the stories of the Bible. Now, that's why these stories are hugely contemporary, and that's why we need to know them. I'm not sure that we know them like we should, probably not, because so many of the situations that we encounter in life, and of course I'm living right now at this time, and this video is being made in the year 2020, which has been quite an unusual year, to say the least. And so we look at these contemporary situations, and some of these things are repeats of history. Some of these things are unique. But even when history does repeat itself, which it often does, it repeats itself in a little bit different way. I heard a designer one time say that fashions do repeat themselves, but they always repeat themselves differently enough to make the repetition different every time that it rolls around. So a contemporary fashion may be a play off of a previous fashion, but they always change it in such a way where you just can't bring out all of your old clothes and wear them again, if you know what I mean. So really, history does repeat itself that way, but it always repeats itself in just a little bit different way. And so that little bit different way makes it unique and makes it a bit of a challenge for those people who are contemporarily living through this repetition of history. So as history repeats itself, and we live in 2020, and things are going on, they've gone on before, but maybe not quite like they are now. The thing that the stories of the Bible help us do is to create a frame of reference to help us interpret the events that we live through. Now, the stories of the Bible give us that backdrop because we can compare present narrative to past narrative, scriptural narrative. So we see the contemporary situation that we're living in, and we have a story in the Bible back here, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I can understand contemporary situations from the stories of the Bible because they are kind of the same, and they join together, and the truths in Scripture apply. So I can understand and I can interpret what's going on now in light of the stories of the Bible. Now, it's just not the stories of the Bible, however. This is why it's very important for us to understand scriptural doctrine. For instance, one of the primary doctrines of Scripture, and as I would understand it, in my estimation, probably one of the cornerstones in the foundation of Christian theology, this is just a for instance, is what we would call depravity. It is that man is born a sinner, original sin, that we do not teach our children to lie and to cheat and to steal and to throw tantrums, but yet it's born in them because man is born a sinner. We are not born good. We have to learn good. Amazing. We learn good, but we're born in evil. And probably in some contemporary way of thinking, people don't accept that very easily these days. And I don't know, maybe it's because we're removed from the 20th century where we saw the most heinous forms of tyranny ever known to man, where communism and socialism itself could probably account for about 100 million deaths in China, in Russia, and in other places around the world. Primarily Russia and China, making up most of those numbers, 100 million. But no one's really certain of that, but that's the best estimate that sociologists can come up with. So maybe we're a bit removed from that, and we don't quite understand how evil can penetrate not just a single human heart, but how evil can penetrate systems, how evil can penetrate societies. And when good people do nothing, or good people say nothing, or people individually shirk their personal responsibility to do the right thing and to speak out against the wrong thing, when that happens, then it is amazing how evil things can just propagate and flourish. And the Bible would speak to that issue by giving us the doctrine of depravity, that man is born a sinner, and man has sin in his heart. Man has, in his natural way of thinking, a sinful path that's very easy. Jesus called it the wide path. But you've got to learn to do good. Okay, and it's a narrow path. And it's something you have to intentionally and deliberately do. So it is the stories of the Bible, the doctrines of the Bible, that shed light on contemporary events and give us the ability to interpret and draw conclusions from what we are witnessing. And that's what we all do, by the way. None of us see reality. We are interpreting reality. And we interpret reality through a variety of ways, but mostly by what we've experienced in the past, from our memories, from our past experiences. We interpret reality from what we believe, our core beliefs in ourselves and core belief in others. And so we interpret those events by what's inside of us. Now, this brings us to this story of Israel at KADESH BARNEA. Because in this story, Moses is commissioning 12 spies to go into the promised land. Now, to back up and to kind of fill in the blanks in case you haven't seen some of the previous teachings, we're just plotting the journey of Israel across the wilderness. And so they left Egypt, they came across the Red Sea, they park at a place at Mount Sinai, and they're there for over a year. And Moses gets the law. He sets up 70 elders to legislate that law. He receives a blueprint pattern to build a tabernacle, which they did. And it's within the tabernacle, housed within its innermost chamber, the Holy of Holies. The glory of God sits above a mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. So the glory of God then is displayed as a cloud by day and a fire by night, and the glory of God just kind of moves and leads Israel. And there's a lot to say about that really it's the Lord and His good pleasure and His manifest presence and His manifested word that should guide a people. And when people are guided by God's word, there are certain blessings, there's a certain satisfaction, there's certain progress. There are many blessings that a people can experience both individually and corporately when they're led by God in that broad statement. That's what the picture kind of reveals to us. So Israel leaves Sinai and they travel across the wilderness. Now, the whole time that they're traveling across the wilderness, they have in their mind that they're going to go to the promised land, and this is Canaan, which is modern day Israel today. So now they've come across this wilderness called Paran, and they park themselves at KADESH BARNEA, which is the threshold. It's on the doorstep of the promised land. And Moses then gets 12 spies, and each of those 12 spies are leaders of their tribes. So these aren't just 12 random people. These are 12 specific leaders that come from the 12 tribes of Israel. So in chapter 13, he begins to name these people that were from these tribes, starting with verse 4, and it goes down through verse 15. And these are the names of the spies that Moses sent out. Now, there's two particular spies. We'll draw them out now because they're going to play a big part in this story later on. The two spies were Caleb and Joshua. So if you know this story, you're way ahead of me. In fact, if you don't know the story, or even if you do, it would be a good idea to pause the video or pause the podcast if you're listening and you have access to a Bible. Then take the Bible and look at chapters 13 and 14 of Numbers. This is an obvious thing that you can do, and you can get to know the story a little bit better as we proceed. So, Caleb and Joshua are going to be very important. The other 10 spies are named, and they're going to be important as well, really important, but they kind of are going to be lumped together as the 10 spies, and then specifically there were two that were drawn out, Caleb and Joshua, and they were different. And we're going to see that in just a minute. But let's talk about this journey and where Israel is in their mind. So they come across the desert, and the whole time that they're coming, you know the story, they're complaining. You know, they're fatalistic, they're nihilistic. Just every little thing blows them away. It's almost like just every little challenge, they just want to throw their hands up in the air and say, well, you know, the last one didn't kill us, but man, this one is going to kill us. And it seems like they teeter on the brink of despair every day. And every little challenge that they face just puts them in such a mindset that they don't know what else to do except just complain about it. And we've talked a lot about complaining. Complaining is like the last hope of a desperate soul that feels absolutely powerless to do anything about their life. So, you know, people that feel powerless, people that just have no confidence in themselves. They have no confidence in their God. They have no optimism. They have no positivity, no idea that they could actually achieve something. It's like the last vestige of hope is that if I complain loud enough, someone's going to hear me. So I think that they're complaining, they're belly aching, they're grumbling, they're murmuring, the Bible calls it, that all of this was done in a hope, because I don't think that people complain and murmur as an end to the purpose of just to murmur and to complain. In other words, I don't think that's the end in itself. I think that murmuring and complaining is a learned behavior that is a means to an end. And the end is, I want someone to come in here and step in and do something about this. I cannot do anything myself. So if I complain and I murmur and I bellyache long enough, I know that they're going to give in, and someone who has the power, someone who has the authority, someone who has the wherewithal, someone who has the ability, besides me, because I have no power, I have no authority, I have no wherewithal, I have no ability to do anything. Well, but I can complain. And if I complain, and if I bellyache and murmur long enough, somebody else, not me, who has the ability and the authority to do something about it, they will step in and they'll do this for me. Now, if that's the case, and by the way, I believe it's absolutely the case, but if that's the case, where did Israel learn that idea? Let's go back to the 12 spies for a minute. So you have 10 spies and Joshua and Caleb. I segregated Joshua and Caleb out from the 10 spies on purpose, because the 10 spies go into the land, and Moses' commission to them was to spy out this land, to look at this land, to take a look at the cities, to take a look at the people, and to bring back a report. Now, a report is not an opinion. Unfortunately, the 10 spies, not Joshua and Caleb, but the 10 other spies of the 12, came back with opinions and reactions and interpretations, but they did not come back with a report. That's That is really something interesting, okay? So the 10 spies came back. Now, let's look at some scripture. So Moses says in Numbers 13:17, he said to them, spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them, go up this way into the south and go up to the mountains, see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. Now that's the commission. To go look and bring back a report. And that report would include what the cities are like. Are they nomadic encampments or are they walled cities? What kind of people are there? Are they strong in number, meaning large numbers of people, like large tribes, large cities, or smaller, again, nomadic groups of people? Look at the lay of the land. Are there forests? Are there mountaintops? Are there valleys? Are there wetlands? Are there arid lands? And then bring back some of the fruit. Let us get a taste of what's there. So this was the report that they were to be given. So they were commissioned to spy out the land and bring back a report of the geography, of the society, to bring back a report on the size perhaps or the strength of military, what's the economy like, to bring back a report. The problem is the 10 spies brought back opinions. They brought back interpretations. They looked at the reality of the promised land, and this is really important, and then they interpreted it through their mind. And what is in their mind? Well, these people were born slaves, lived life up until about a year and a half ago as slaves. They interpreted life, reality, cities, people groups, geography, fruit, through a slave mentality. Now, why did Moses even write down the first 5 books of the Bible? Here's why. Because he has the unenviable task of taking a group of people who all of their life, for generations previously, had lived in slavery. And he had to bring them from a slave mentality, I've been calling it, to a nationalistic mentality. Nationalistic meaning, at least in this context, a very positive thing. That is that we're no longer slaves. We are God's people. We are chosen. We are special. We walk in the blessing of God. We have God on our side. The God factor was the primary change agent in the attempt of Moses by the hand of God to change a mentality of people from a slave mentality to this one of nationalism, one of a healthy, good pride in themselves, in their God, in their nation, to build a great nation. Now, why did God want to make Israel great? I'll tell you why. Because he wanted his glory to fill the earth. God didn't just send blessings to Israel. His idea was to bless the earth through Israel. But in order to bless the earth, he had to redeem and segregate a blessed people. Of all the people of the earth, of all the people groups and the tribes and nationalities that filled the earth at that time, he sovereignly chose Israel to be a nation, not just to contain his blessings and receive his blessings, but a conduit through which the whole earth could be blessed. This was always the plan of God from the time that he spoke to Abraham, his covenant. Not to Israel, but through Israel, that the whole world could be filled with the glory of God. The problem is, this generation of people still thought like slaves. This is why, through the process of coming through the wilderness, they complained and they murmured, they bellyached, because their concept of the world, their interpretation of the world, their worldview was something like this: I can't, so you must. Now this leads us to maybe a little bit of a review of some things that we've said previously, that the slave mentality is really a result of a people that feel so inferior. And this was the case, and this is always the case of people that have been captivated by others or have been manipulated and controlled by others. Now, in slavery, let's make it broad, and we can make it personal, we can make it systematic, we can make it corporate on any level, even on a personal level. When someone has been controlled and manipulated by somebody else, this could happen in a marriage, it could happen in any relationship, where there is an individual that is not allowed to think for themselves, there's an individual that's not allowed to make their own choices, they have been completely controlled and manipulated by someone else. It could happen in a situation with a child, with overbearing parents, it could happen to a spouse in a marital situation, it could happen in friendships, where one friend just controls and manipulates every move of the other, where the other person, really in most cases, at least in the way I'm describing it now, would submit themselves, make the choice to actually be controlled by someone else. They're not allowed to think for themselves. They're not allowed to do for themselves. And so we could track this whole mentality on a personal level like that. We could track it on a level, let's say, of someone who has just given up all hope and in achieving anything in their life. And so there could be a whole system, an economic system, let's say, that could be controlling and manipulating, in the sense that people work jobs they hate, they live in a home that they don't like, they get up every day and they go to the same job, and they're caught kind of in what amounts to an economic slavery, in the sense that they feel like they have no options. And I think that that's really a common thing that you'll find when there's been a personal individual that's been manipulated and controlled by another individual, or if there's groups of people, let's say in an economic system, that they feel oppressed in that sense. They feel like that there's just no options, like I can't. And so the idea of entitlement usually is on the upper end of the financial spectrum. We think of people being entitled who have an incredible amount of wealth and they feel entitled. And that happens, absolutely, and it's despicable and horrible and immoral to feel entitled because of your wealth or your position. And many times that wealth and position was nothing that the person did themselves. They probably inherited some of it from parents or grandparents or whatever, and that even makes it worse, because their entitlement, at least if you earned it, there's a sense of entitlement that you have earned for yourself, where in other cases it's an entitlement because of birth. And much of that has been rejected by the West, and since the fall of European monarchies, etc. So that has been, we've divested ourselves of that kind of entitlement in the sense of royalty, but we still have that kind of entitlement with those who are in the upper spectrum of wealth. But what about the entitlement that's on the other end of the spectrum? That doesn't get talked about a lot, but there's also an entitlement that can be developed in what I'm calling a slave mentality. And that entitlement sounds something like this: I can't, so you must. Now, you take a person that's been manipulated personally, or maybe there's groups of families that's in an economic system where they feel controlled, manipulated, they feel like they have no say in their life, they're spiraling in a situation of debt. They have to go to a job that they hate because they got to get paid the money that they just put in one pocket, and then it goes out the other pocket to pay their bills, to pay their mortgage. So they're kind of in an economic slavery, if you will, if I can use that term. And certainly when it comes to real life slavery, in the sense of enslaving another people, when it comes to human trafficking and that type of thing in slavery, what I'm talking about in economic slavery cannot even compare. I get that. Absolutely. And I totally agree with that. There's no comparison to, what we see in terms of human trafficking to someone in an economic slavery, as I'm saying. But I'm trying to just bring out some principles to say that there's consistency among the reaction of people who have come to a point in their life where they feel like they have no options, where they've been manipulated and controlled by outside events, outside systems, or outside human beings. So you have the personal kind of human manipulation and control that could happen inside of a marriage or a friendship or inside of a family when parents are domineering over their children. But you also can have it in a systematic way, let's say an economic system where people feel like they have no options. And here in Southern Ohio, you kind of have that, where there's a sense of poverty. And that sense of poverty really convinces people they have no options. Like, you can't do this. You can't control your destiny. You You can't go to college. You're not going to have a six-figure salary. You're never going to be able to have a comfortable life. Well, the best that you can do is just settle for this because you have no options. And people can allow themselves to get in a mindset of absolute despair and despondency where they're just nihilistic and fatalistic about life, and they feel like that there's no hope. They feel like that there is no future for them. They feel like, and you know what I'm talking about. I mean, especially if you live within the sphere of this area, which is an Appalachian poverty, you understand, you see it every day of your life and have experienced it, no doubt, to some degree. And so you feel like you have no options. And so Israel was in that place. It's like they come out of slavery. And what is slavery? Slavery is an absolute domineering, being controlled and being owned by your masters. And the owners of slaves have a vested interest in keeping slaves despondent, miserable, hopeless. They have a vested interest in pressuring and oppressing their slaves to the point where slaves have no self-confidence. The last thing that an owner of slaves wants is for the slaves to feel self-confident, educated, hopeful, positive, and optimistic. No, we do everything we can to keep them hopeless and convinced they have no solutions. They have no options. So what happened to Israel? Well, they come out of slavery, but slavery never came out of them. They're coming across the wilderness, and they complain. Complain. Why do they complain? Because complaining and murmuring and belly aching is the last and sometimes only hope of the oppressed person that feels like they have no options. So here's what they do. They see every challenge as being inescapable and unconquerable. Whether it's we don't have meat, we don't have water, it's hot, no matter what challenge, well, we don't have any garlic, leeks, and onions to spice up our food. Every challenge to them, every challenge, no matter how great or how small, every challenge seems fatal, final, hopeless, no options. And so what did Israel do? Well, they do what a lot of people do when they have that mentality. They complain and murmur, but do nothing to help the problem, to solve the problem. They murmur, they complain, they bellyache, they get attention, but do nothing themselves to conquer that problem because they feel hopeless. They feel like there are no options. And so this inferiority, what does it produce? It produces vulnerability. And then that vulnerability, when people feel vulnerable, then what do? Well, they retract themselves. They find a place, because they feel so inferior, they find a place of self-protection in the hope that somebody else will step up and do it for them. Now, if you go back to the story in Egypt, you have the whole episode where Pharaoh, when Moses first comes to him and says, "Let my people go," Pharaoh told the slaves, "You have to make the same quota of bricks, but you're going to have to go cut your own straw. We're going to stop giving you straw." And it just throws the slaves for a loop because the thing that they depended on, which in this case was a government handout, in every sense it was. So the Egyptian government was to give them the straw, and then they had to make the bricks. Well, when that stopped, it was like Satan's attempt to raise up a rebellion and an attitude against Moses and against freedom. Why? Like, why would a group of slaves actually rise up and criticize the person who's come to help set them free? Why would they rise up and tell him to go home and to shut up and to quit talking about freedom? Because they didn't feel like they had the ability to achieve without the things that the Egyptian government was giving to them. And they felt like that the issue of freedom was so far away that they could never get there, so why even talk about it? And the sense of taking responsibility for yourself was a conversation that they didn't want to have. The self-confidence to actually take responsibility, and that's what freedom is. Freedom is responsibility. And at least when, would be the Israelites talking, at least when I was a slave, they did it for me. So what is the entitlement that is ingrained in the slave mentality? Is the entitlement that says, I can't, so you must. Well, how do I get you to do what you must? Well, I can complain. I can murmur, complain, and have such a bad attitude that if for no other reason, just to shut me up, you'll actually go do what I want you to do and what I cannot do for myself. It reminds me a bit of the story that Jesus told about the widow woman who came to the unjust judge, and the unjust judge, really to only protect his reputation, it was a culture of honor that they lived in, and so he wanted to save face, and so he didn't want to look bad. He really had no justice in his heart. He really was not worried about giving her justice. That was not his motive. His motive was actually selfish, to save face, and the fact that she just weary me. And there's a phrase in there that is an idiom that expresses being blackened, having a black eye by somebody. And my understanding is that he used that language of that idiom to say, if she's going to soil my reputation, if she's going to black my eye, would be how we would say, if she's going to soil my reputation, if she's going to give me a black eye, if she's going to give me a black mark on my reputation, well then fine, here, I'm going to judge for you. And she got the justice that she wanted. Now that's a story with a different purpose that Jesus told, but there's that idea that the widow who had no rights in that day, I mean, there was no safety net, social safety net for someone like a widow. They just had to fend for themselves, and if they had no family and offspring, then they would probably die in the streets. That's the cold reality of that time. And so it was life and death for her to get the judgment. Well, what did she do? She complained, and finally the judge did relent. Well, this is kind of the mentality of the hopeless, of the vulnerable, of those people that feel so inferior, they feel inferior, and from the place of inferiority, they feel vulnerability, and from the place of vulnerability, then they feel a sense of inadequacy, of hopelessness. I have no options. There's nothing that I can do for myself, and so what can I do? Well, let's see, I can complain. I'll complain and murmur and make such a noise that I can get someone who does have authority, who does have ability to step in and do this for me. Now, is there a place where in all reality there's a vulnerable people and they do not have, or a vulnerable person who does not have the ability to do for themselves? Yes, absolutely. There are moments for that. But the reality of what Scripture teaches us is that although there are times where we need the help of others to step in, that is only the exception to the rule, and that is not the way to live the best life possible. The best life possible is when we trust God and we know that we are blessed and favored and born again. We have access to the throne room of God. We are accepted in His beloved family. And from that place, it replaces my vulnerability and empowers me with the proper worldview to say, you know what, I can do this. And that's the story of these spies. Because Moses sends them out to give a report of the facts of the land. What kind of cities are we looking at? What kind of people are we looking at? But the 12 spies were so inundated with the mentality that I'm describing as a slave mentality, which is, I can't, so you must. That sense of inferiority that produces vulnerability, that produces inadequacy, and that inadequacy tells me I can't win a war. I can't fight these people. Well, I mean, there's nothing we can do. Yeah, 10 spies had that mentality. And here's the report that they brought back. Verse 27, it says, then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us, and truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. And then if you skip down to verse 32, it says, "And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, The land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight." Let me read that last part again. "And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." Do you see what's happening here? The 10 spies did not come back with a report of the land. They came back with a report of themselves. Because fortified cities, how did they interpret it? Well, a fortified city, we saw all of these different cities with big walls around them. And they're fortified and very great. Well, what did that say to the 10 spies? The 10 spies drew this interpretation and conclusion from walled cities. Well, that's going to keep us out, and there is no hope that we could ever conquer them. But that's an absolutely wrong interpretation of walled cities in a land. Here's what it says, actually. It says that the people of Canaan are so divided among themselves that they have to build walls around their cities because they don't trust each other. One city would war against another city, and that city against another one, and that against another one, and then those cities would take advantage of the war between these cities, and they fought amongst each other to such a degree that every city had to build its own wall. You see, a walled city is not to keep us out. A walled city declares that this people is so divided, they're going to be easily conquered. Do you see what I'm saying? And so they interpreted the walled cities completely wrongly. But why did they interpret reality wrongly? Why? Because of what they believed about themselves. Their own identity was the identity of a slave. The sense of inferiority, vulnerability, the sense of being inadequate with no options. And so they interpreted reality based on their own self-image. And how do I know their self-image? Well, that one verse that I read twice where it says, "We were grasshoppers in our sight, so we were in theirs too." They assumed that people saw them as they see themselves, which is never really the case. And so they saw themselves as grasshoppers. They still viewed themselves as inadequate, vulnerable, inferior slaves. Because they had that self-image, they interpreted other people's opinions about them based on that self-image. We can do that all the time. Like, you can walk into a room and just assume that everybody is thinking stuff about you, when probably, in fact, they're not. Maybe no one even notices. Or maybe you go into a room and instantly you feel inferior. Okay? You walk into a room, there's 50 people in there. It's some kind of a dinner party. They're standing up, they're mingling, they're talking, and you walk into the room and instantly you feel inferior. And then you feel vulnerable. Okay? And then from vulnerability comes inadequacy. Well, if you're feeling that way about yourself, if you feel that way about yourself, the moment you walk into a room, your assumption is, other people see me as I see myself. And if I am inferior and vulnerable and inadequate, they're seeing me as inferior, vulnerable, and inadequate. And because of that, then I'm going to assume that everything they do, I'm going to interpret everything they do based on that self-image. So when I leave the room, even though this is not reality, when I leave the room and give a report about that dinner party, my report can be like, "Oh, they're a bunch of snobs. They're all stuck up. No one even talked to me. This is a bunch of people who think they're better than me." This happens all the time. We have a tendency to interpret life based on our own self-image. And this is definitely what is going on with Israel. They complain across the desert. They come to KADESH BARNEA. And at that moment, 10 spies come back, not with a report about the land. They come back with an interpretation that is a wrong interpretation. But that interpretation, the report they gave, was actually a report about themselves. Because the conclusion is, we're grasshoppers. Now, Caleb and Joshua are of a different spirit. The Bible says that about them. They're of a different spirit. And if you look at a few verses earlier than the one that I read about the grasshoppers, you'll see in verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it." And Caleb and Joshua were the two spies, and the only two, that gave the report that factored God and themselves as warriors, that factored God and themselves as warriors into the conclusion that we are well able to overcome it. So 10 spies turned the heart of the people against going into the promised land. And they began to murmur and complain. In the next chapter, chapter 14, it says, starting with verse 1, "So the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if we had only died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it now not be better for us to return to Egypt?'" Ooh. So our children are going to be victims. Why did God let this happen? This is going to destroy us. And so the people lifted up their voice and they complained, which is the last hope of someone that feels inadequate, like there's no options. And then they declare that their children are going to be victimized by this episode of trying to go into the wilderness. And here's what's sad. The people decided to turn around and to leave. You know, you're never really free from bondage just because you come out of that bondage. To be free from bondage is a twofold process of coming out and going in. And it wouldn't matter if that bondage was drugs and alcohol, some form of addiction. It wouldn't matter if that bondage is a toxic relationship. It wouldn't matter if that bondage is control and manipulation. Coming out of the situation without going into a new situation will likely result in a person going full circle and right back to the same old lifestyle. See it over and over again. Coming out, in fact, is the easy part. If you look at this story, coming out, at least from the standpoint of the Israelites, God did that. I mean, like God sent the plagues and sent discomfort to Israel, to Egypt. So Israel coming out, and God parted the Red Sea for them and destroyed Egypt. I mean, that was like the last, you are now out of Egypt. But the real challenge was to take this journey into a land of fruitfulness. And you cannot enter into a better and new situation until you first change your attitude about yourself. Now, Caleb and Joshua, I thought something was interesting about this, so I researched their names. And here's what their names mean. Caleb means faithful and committed. Cool. Joshua, from which we get the name Jesus, means Jehovah saves. I don't think it's just a coincidence that these two elements have a different report in our lives than the 10 spies. The 10 spies are reflective of human nature to feel inferior and vulnerable and incapable of fulfilling our life in such a way that we could be successful or to be victorious. Caleb and Joshua, their names represent the two attitudes that have to be developed in order to move into fruitfulness. Caleb means committed, absolutely committed, and faithful. And I believe that is, whether Joshua probably would come first, the idea of Joshua and what his name means. Well, let's just start with Caleb. Caleb is referring to a person's attitude about themselves and about their sense of taking responsibility for their lives and being absolutely committed to the task and being faithful. Now, why is that important? It's because the way that God operates in his kingdom, God does nothing alone. I think it was John Wesley that said, God does nothing but in answer to prayer. Now, that'll kind of be tested with your theology of the sovereignty of God, but I think that we would all agree at least this, no matter which position you would take towards the sovereignty of God, that everything that God does in our life involves us. At least most things that God does in our life involves us. In the sense of in our daily living. Like even when you come to Christ, many people like myself, we came to Christ and we know the day that we came to Christ, we made a decision to follow Christ. Now, in all good theology, we would give God total glory for that. We would say, well, he sent his Holy Spirit to me and God did that for me from the foundation of the world. There was a sovereign act of God that was imposed upon me in many ways. And people that hold a strong view of sovereignty would say, well, Mark Pfeiffer, you had nothing to do with your salvation. You had nothing to do with being saved. It was not anything you did. It was absolutely 100% from God. Now, doctrinally and theologically and even theoretically, based on what Scripture says, yeah, I can agree with that. Absolutely. I will stand with you in that camp and in that reality. However, on June 23rd, 1980, while this may be true, it felt a lot like I had something to do with it. Now, therein lies a bit of the division, not a bit, but a lot of the division between a Wesleyan Arminianism and Calvinism. So that argument's been going on for a long time, so why wade into those waters when so many smarter people have done that for us? But I'm just saying, from my perspective, while biblical theology may say this about sovereignty of God, and while I would agree with that, I know that on June 23rd, 1980, when I came to Jesus experientially, it felt like I went to church. It felt like I listened. It felt like I made a decision. It felt like I got up. It felt like I walked down to the altar. It felt like I prayed. It felt like I prayed the sinner's prayer, and it felt pretty much like I had accepted an invitation. So it felt like I was involved in that in some way, shape, or form. Now, you can argue that I had nothing to do with it, fine, but it seemed a lot to me like I did have something to do with it, and so that's experiential. We would call experiential theology versus biblical theology. Biblical theology should always trump our experiential theology. So I get it. And that's fine. I'm just saying this, that Caleb and Joshua, Caleb means absolutely committed to the task, someone who is faithful. And I'm saying that in order for us, and this is the whole point, we'll come down to this conclusion, the whole ability for us to escape a slave mentality that interprets life based on my self-image, that I am absolutely inadequate, I am inferior and vulnerable. There's nothing that I can do about this except just complain and turn around and walk away. That kind of lack of confidence in yourself, okay, that kind of lack, I think that the terms Caleb and Joshua give us an insight of how to overcome that. And Caleb means absolutely committed 100% to the task of being very faithful. Think about the times that Jesus made binary statements, and they are kind of all or nothing statements. He made statements like, well, if you're not for me, you're against me. That's a binary statement. He made statements like there's two paths that you can take. There's a broad way and there's a narrow way. Two paths, there's not a mediocre way. This is not the story of the three bears. Remember the porridge in the bed? This is too hot, this is too cold, this one's just right. This bed's too hard, this one's too soft, this one is just right. And so Jesus took out the this is just right option. He's like, okay, there are two types of people, wheat and tares. There's two types of people, sheep and goats. There's two places to spend eternity, heaven and hell. Okay, it's like so much of what Jesus talked about, sons of light and sons of darkness. It's like this binary one or the other. Now, by all measures, we could make a philosophical argument. We'd say, well, you know what? Like, there's a little bit of good and bad people, and there's a little bit of bad and good people, and maybe there's some areas of gray, like where this person, are they good or are they bad? Is this good or is it evil? Well, you can try to look at situations, and it's not always easy to take a binary template and put over everything in your life and declare one of the other extremes that it's good or it's evil. Because there are times where I'm not sure. This is somewhere on the spectrum in between. Jesus threw away the spectrum at times to give us a binary choice. And I've thought a lot about that. And I think the reason is this, that most every choice that you and I make, we only make to the degree that we are desperate for change. Like I think if there's, if there's more than two choices, let's say heaven or hell. Like if there's more than two choices, well, there's this place, it's mostly heaven, a little bit of hell, but mostly heaven. And this place is, well, this is not really good. It's mostly hell and a little bit of heaven. Then there's a place kind of where it's 50-50, and most days it's heaven. Then towards the end of the day, it's hell. It's like, well, if there's a spectrum, you really are stuck in between. Like you don't make valid life-changing choices somewhere in the shade of gray. Now you think about life. Like if you're really going to lose weight and get in shape, listen, you just got to get desperate enough that you're all in, or you're not in at all. Like our military, they train people to be all in. If you're not all in, you're not prepared for battle. So most decisions that we make in life that really are life-changing are binary, at least in the way that we're interpreting our options. And it's usually when you just get right down to the last minute, you have no other option. You've been to the doctor, your cholesterol is high, your heart has a problem, you're overweight, and the doctor looks at you and says, you're probably going to have about 5 more years of life if you don't make some life changes now. And then it's like, whoa, you get woken up, and what has the doctor done? It's either change your diet or die. He's given you a binary choice because most human beings don't make committed life-changing choices until they've reached a point of desperation with usually binary choices. Heaven or hell, life or death, wheat or tares, sheep or goats, sons of light, sons of darkness. Come on, you make the decision. Caleb represents a mindset that helps us escape the reality of a slave mentality that sees ourselves as grasshoppers. And what Caleb says, his name says to us, is that we have to reach the place of absolute desperation, absolute selling out. I'm absolutely committed. I'm either going to take this land or I will die trying. I am not going back to the wilderness. I'm not going back to slavery. And I'm going to make a decision to take responsibility for my life, get out of bed, and give it my all and give it my best, because I don't have the luxury of options right now. I don't have the luxury of 3 or 4 or 5 choices. It's like the enemy is at my doorstep. War has been declared. Light is in danger of retraction, and darkness is taking over. And it's not to the point of absolute desperation. And this is what Tolkien brought out in The Lord of the Rings. Like the hobbits were they were in love with comfort, and they were a nice, peaceful little life. And it really was taken, I think, from his own experiences of living in England and then going into the horrors of World War I. It's like you're brought into this thing suddenly and without consent, but darkness is on your doorstep, and you just got to get to the place where you see life in such binary aspects that you say, I have no choice, I have no other option, I got to do this or I'm going to die. And it's like, yes, take responsibility, Caleb. Come on, step up, Caleb. Caleb jumps up and says, we're able to overcome these people. And I think Caleb was saying, I may die on the battlefield, which he did not, by the way. He lived through the 40 years wandering in the desert, and he came back and he conquered the land and took Hebron. It's a beautiful story, but he didn't know that at the beginning of this thing. I think Caleb was just saying, look, I ain't going back. I will die on the battlefield because I'm committed. Well, that's Caleb. What about Joshua? Joshua's name means Jehovah brings salvation. And that's the second thing that brings us out of a slave mentality. You got to be absolutely committed and have some confidence in yourself. And even this idea that, you know what, even if I fail, I would rather be a soldier bravely dying on the field than a coward that's going to walk back into the wilderness I came from. Joshua means God is salvation. Jehovah is salvation. So what's that mean? It's talking about our faith in God. It's talking about just an absolute commitment to taking responsibility for my life and making something of myself, and I'm going to make the world a better place, and I'm going to claim something for God because I know when it's in my hands, it's in the hands of a person that absolutely loves God. Joshua, his name means Jehovah is salvation. And it means that Jehovah is going to do something for me, that God's going to come through for me. You may feel like you've been manipulated and controlled all your life, and you may feel so inferior and vulnerable and inadequate in your life, and you just want to give up and just start complaining and hope that somebody else steps up in your place and fights this battle and wins it for you. No, 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 Caleb. No, Joshua. You got to have some faith in God, that God loves you. And the beauty of the gospel is this, that no matter where you've been and what you've done, Jesus paid the price for your salvation. Jesus paved the way. Jesus gave you the right to be called a son or daughter of God. And Jesus brought you in with his credentials into the throne room of God. And when God sees you, looks at you, and hears you, he literally filters that through the voice and the image of his perfect son, Jesus Christ. You are to God what Jesus is to God. That's the beauty of the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And when we have the confidence to know the commitment, let's say that, the commitment of Caleb, then we have the confidence of Joshua. The confidence of Joshua is this sense. And as I said before, it probably starts with this concept first. And maybe I should have said this first, that the confidence that we have of Joshua gives us the commitment of Caleb. And that's probably a better way to arrange it. But regardless, Joshua means Jehovah saves, and that's just to say God is going to do some things that I can't. God is the one, and instead of just complaining to Moses, hoping someone will take pity on me and step up and do this for me, there is a sense where no man is going to step up and do what I can do for myself as a Caleb. But I know this, there's things I can't do as Caleb. And when I come to a place when I can't do in my Caleb, I'm going to do in my Joshua, and that is that God's going to come through for me, that God is going to bless me, that God is going to guide me, that God is going to give me hope, that God will give me wisdom, God will give me a game plan. He will come through for me. And we know that God did this for Israel eventually. But here's the sad point of this story. Here's how the story ends. They ignore their Caleb. They ignore their Joshua. And that's what people do. It's some of you may be watching this video or listening to the podcast. You've already thought up 1,000 excuses why you can't do your Caleb. You've probably already thought up 1,000 excuses why Joshua doesn't work for you. Because you've got another voice inside of you that's constantly trying to draw you back into Egypt. Another voice inside of you. It's the voice of Pharaoh. It is the voice of the devil. It is the voice of Satan that literally tries to draw us back from claiming our promise and our fruitfulness in God and draw us back into a wilderness where we die, or draw us worse back into Egypt where we are enslaved again, because you're blocking the very reality of truthful interpretation of your circumstances, because somewhere you find comfort in the slave mentality, because at least if I'm a slave, they're going to feed me and they're going to house me and they're going to do for me. I don't like it. It's dehumanizing. Well, but at least I have a bed at night. It's like the recidivism in people that have come out of prison and they have a tendency to recommit crimes and somehow, maybe even subconsciously, to try to find a way back into prison, because in prison there's order, there is structure. They understand prison life better than they understand free life. In free life, there's too much responsibility. But I can go back to prison, and I'm in prison. Well, at least I have 3 square meals a day and a warm bed to sleep in, and I understand that culture. And there's a certain structure and order that'll bring me some form of comfort. And that same mentality happens to people when they drift back into their old lifestyle. And I think that's why the Bible says that if you train a child up in the way they should go, when they're older, they'll not depart from it, because these patterns, once they set inside of our brains and inside of our hearts, are very hard to break. And so we've got to depend on God. God's going to come through for me. It's my Caleb. I'm all in, man. I'll die on the battlefield if necessary. By God, I will not go back to Egypt. And Joshua says, And God will save. God's going to do things for me that I couldn't do for myself. And God's going to come through for me. But here's the thing, listen. You got to get out on the battlefield first before you can see God. God didn't go tear down the walls of Jericho, not at that point. He didn't tear down the walls of Jericho until Israel crossed over and circled Jericho and were obedient to the word of God. Then God came through for them. So in that sense, yeah, maybe the reality of at least the way we experience it, we experience Caleb before Joshua, perhaps even. That we've got to get committed. You got to make a choice. You got to say, are you committed to freedom? Are you committed to God? Are you committed to your life? I mean, it's life and death for you. It's like the kingdom of God is everything for you. You want to go to heaven? Not hell? Okay. Well, you want to live a good life and not a cursed life? Well, okay. Then rise up, Caleb, and just be all in. And that's why the binary choices were given to us by Jesus, to give us an opportunity to evaluate life in two simple terms and then go for it. And most life-changing decisions are reached in a time where we have a binary set of decisions and it's either life and death for us. Then we make the right choice. In fact, we surprise ourselves. People surprise themselves all the time when they get in life and death situations, how strong they are, how incredibly enduring they are, because they survive absolutely incredible odds. Human beings are absolutely amazing for what they're able to overcome. But usually in a case where it's life and death, it's a binary choice, Caleb. And Joshua, well, Joshua is the belief that God is salvation. He's going to come through for me. I'm going to go out there. It's like, God, I'm going out on the battlefield. And if you come with me, we're going to be victorious. If you don't come with me, well, I'm going to die out there. But then again, I'm dead anyway. I'm all in. This is just a beautiful thing to behold, a person that's just absolutely dead in Christ. I mean, they're so sold out and surrendered. It's a Caleb, man. It's a thing that miracles are made out of. When people step out on the battlefield with Caleb and Joshua as the leader of Israel, eventually he was the general. He was the one that led the way. He was the one that made the structure, the battle plans, the decisions, the plotting of a map and putting the forces in proper array, and then having a strategy on the tactical and strategic level, and even on the theater level of the whole nation. He had a strategy that he was working out, and that is what Jehovah does in that instance. But what about these slaves? This story ends really sad because God says, fine, everyone 20 years old and older is going to die in the wilderness, and you're going to be out there 40 years. So go. You're not ready. Back out in the wilderness you go. And everyone 40 years and older died. And what's so amazing is back in the 3rd verse of chapter 14, people were afraid that their children will be victims. And then verse 31, God says, but your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I'm going to bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. So, yeah, you're worried about your kids being victims. Well, God's got other plans. And it's sad because Israel was at KADESH BARNEA. They are there ready to go into the promised land, and they refuse. There was a group the next day that said, oh, okay, we changed our mind. We're going to go. And so they tried to cross over, were soundly defeated. Moses didn't go with them. The Ark of the Covenant didn't go with them. So some opportunities, it's like Leonard Ravenhill said, the opportunity of a lifetime must be seized in the lifetime of the opportunity. That's good. Because opportunities seldom come announced. Opportunities seldom come at a convenient time. And some opportunities come by once, and then they're done. And this opportunity for people 20 years old and older, in Israel's case, was a once every 40 years opportunity, and they missed it. The only people that lived and survived through the next 40 years in the wilderness, guess who? Caleb and Joshua. Because your Caleb and your Joshua will always, always be there for you. If you take responsibility for your life and decide you're not going to live like a slave, with a slave mentality, but you're going to rise up and be someone of dignity. Moses lived through the 40 years, but unfortunately he was not allowed to go into the promised land. But Caleb and Joshua did. And Joshua led the forces of Israel, and Caleb, he picked out a place he had seen 40 years before called Hebron, and he took Hebron, and his descendants lived there. Listen, There's a lot about these stories that really, really speak to us. So I hope some of these things spoke to you today. God bless you. I love you all so much. Thank you for watching.